Good morning, Northgate. It's so good to see everybody. And I am here with my former professor and current friend, Roger Ross. It's so good to see you.
Jennifer?
Well, it's the miracles of the internet that are keeping us together because you don't even live in Texas. So this is really perfect that we get to have virtual coffee together and everybody gets to watch. This is great.
It is great.
Yeah, I'm excited. Although, actually, I need to rename this today because I have Diet Coke. So today it's Diet Coke with the pastor.
Okay.
And is that okay?
Yeah, it's okay because I have tea, so we're good there.
See, maybe it should just be beverages with the pastor.
All
And,
right.
everybody can just choose what they want to do. No judgment, right?
Right.
Maybe we could do that. So anyway, I am so glad that I get a chance to talk with you and catch up because I have not seen you. When was the last time? When did we have class together?
So, our class was in January of 2020 before the world changed.
That is crazy. And we had no idea.
No.
I mean, we were clueless.
It was the only class that I have had at Perkins in person.
Really?
Yeah.
Have you been teaching that same class since then?
So I taught it again in January of 21. And then in between there, not this past summer, but the summer before, during the pandemic, I taught a completely online class in evangelism.
Wow. It's hard for me. So for those of you who are watching, who are probably like, what are these two weirdos talking about? Right now, what we're talking about is I took a class with Roger at Perkins that was on evangelism, that was specifically on church planting. And if you're not familiar with church planting, that's really a whole other podcast. I mean, that takes a long time. But basically creating a new church from nothing, right?
Right.
And you've done that before very successfully. And so you taught that class, and I needed evangelism credit, and I did not feel called to be a church planter, but I felt called to complete my degree at Perkins. And I needed an evangelism credit, and it was offered during the January term. And so that's what we're talking about, is this intensive class that I took where I dragged along my teenage son, Jack, who loved it. And it was a wonderful experience, but it was so experiential, and we took so many field trips and stuff. I can't imagine doing that solely online. You know what I mean?
Yeah, actually, of course, you can't take the field trip. And that was one of the highlights of the whole class for sure. But I was able to bring in some people from the outside because you can, when you're online, you can bring in people from the outside just the same as you can in person. And we did some of that actually in that class. But I think you lose a little bit of something. I like to be face to face in person if possible. I think when you go from 3D to 2D, you miss a lot in that 1D.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. I will never, ever forget. I'm going to get emotional. I'm going to try not to. I will never forget the experience of Jack being there with you because he had such a powerful encounter with the Holy Spirit in that class. And it really has made a profound effect, a lasting effect on his faith. And I'm grateful for that. And that last class we had where you anointed us with oil was so powerful and is not something you can replicate on Zoom or whatever it is. So while I am grateful for all the technology that we have, I think you're right. I mean, it's just not always going to be the same experience. So that's great.
It's not, but it was a thrill to have Jack in the class with you. Jack, who was 13 at the time?
He's now 15, and can you believe he's in high school now?
Yeah.
And he's 15. He tells you hello, by the way. He's very upset that he can't be here right now because he wanted to be on camera talking to Roger Ross. But I told him that I would pass along all of his good wishes. So he remembers you very fondly, and he loved it. He's still he went to Perkins classes with me, and much like the other students, kind of paid attention, kind of not, just kind of depends. He remembers so much of your class. He continues this day to quote you back to me occasionally. When things come up in ministry, he remembers what you said in class.
Yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, he was so attentive. I was stunned by that. I'm like, at 13, I would have gone, looking for a video game. I mean, I just would not have done that. So.
He's a different kid and he's amazing and I'm grateful for him. So anyway, enough about Jack. We could do a whole separate podcast on him. I mean, I've got like a season's worth of material basically, I think here that we could just talk about all day. But why don't, since we obviously know each other because we had this, immersion experience together. So I know you pretty well and I think you're amazing, or I wouldn't have asked you on Beverages with the Pastor. On that name. But other people who are watching this probably don't know you. So to really kick things off, can you tell people your name, where you live, a little bit about your background and what your current ministry setting is?
Sure. Well, my name is Roger Ross, and I actually grew up and spent most of my life in Illinois, and actually did attend Perkins back in the day before I went into ministry full-time as a pastor. And had a wonderful experience of Perkins, but that was like back in the 80s. That was a long time ago. So things have changed a bit since then. And I served as a pastor for over 30 years in Illinois in a lot of different pastoral settings, from very small church and very small town to larger churches. I had the privilege of starting a couple of churches and then most recently served as a senior pastor at Springfield First United Methodist in Springfield, Illinois. And then 4 years ago, I sensed a call to be involved in church planting on a fuller time basis. And so there was an opportunity to become the director of congregational excellence in the Missouri Conference of the United Methodist Church. And so that's where I've been the last 4 years, living in Columbia, Missouri, which is right in the middle of the state. Where Mizzou is actually. And in that role, I help to start new churches. I have a team that I work with, and I help to start new churches and transform existing churches across the state of Missouri. And there are about 700 United Methodist churches in Missouri.
Well, that ought to keep you pretty busy.
It does. It keeps me on the road, except during COVID. And instead of being on the road in COVID, I've been on Zoom.
Well, that works too. I mean, we all have to adapt, right? And just do the best that we can with where we are. So I'm going to keep praying that the COVID numbers continue to get better because I think we're all a little tired of this. And you're probably ready to be back on the road more regularly. It probably makes things easier for you. Yeah,
actually, it's just beginning to start back up, and I'm traveling a little bit more now.
Yeah, well, that's not so bad. Again, it probably keeps you out of trouble.
Yeah,
so,
true enough.
As you are, I'm glad you're here because as I said, when I emailed you, I had no expectations that you would respond with anything other than that's adorable. I'm really too busy to do this. So I'm thrilled that I was able to snag an hour of your time and chat with you today. And the reason that I wanted to talk to you, other than, of course, extolling Jack's virtues and talking about just general ministry and catching up, is that I saw on Facebook, this is where all my ideas come from. I saw on Facebook where you posted and said that you had been on a 30-day silent retreat. Is that accurate?
That is true.
Okay, so that is something that I suspect that not a lot of people have done, and some people might not even be aware of. So where did you get the idea to do this in the first place?
Well, one of the things that we talked about in the class that we were referencing a little bit ago was that I've been involved with a spiritual director for over 30 years now. And my spiritual director's name is Father Bill Creed. He's a Jesuit priest. And I got connected with him when I was serving as an associate pastor right out of seminary in the Quad Cities. I was living in Moline and he was living in Rock Island, which are sister cities. And so I started meeting with him at that point, and that relationship, much to my surprise and his, I think, has just continued on. I mean, it's been many years since he or I lived in the Quad Cities, but we've continued to connect with each other. And over that time, he kept encouraging me to do retreats, kind of longer retreats. So originally I would do 2 or 3 days. And that was a pretty big deal for me, being someplace in a retreat center, mostly by myself, except for maybe meeting with Father Bill for an hour or so once a day. And then he said, well, you really ought to consider doing an 8-day spiritual retreat, silent retreat. And I'm like, I just can't see that happening. He talked about that for, oh gosh, I don't know, over 15 years before I ever thought that that was a good idea. And then I got into a really bad spot in the place in ministry where I was, to the point that I thought, I'm going to have to do something I've never done before, or I might not be able to continue as a pastor. I'm going to still be married to my wife. I'm still going to be the father to my 2 kids.
Right.
But other than that, everything else was kind of up on the table at that point. And so I went on this 8-day retreat. This was in 2005, and it was a game changer for me. I mean, oh my gosh, I had no idea how powerful that was going to be. It was scary. I'd never done anything like that before. I'm not a natural introvert. People think when they hear me say that I've done a 30-day silent retreat, they think, oh, well, you just must like to be by yourself all the time. No, that is not right. And actually, ironically, extroverts are the ones that probably need this more than anybody else, frankly.
Right.
But nevertheless, I did that retreat. It was fantastic. In fact, so great. I said to my wife, honey, I think it'd be great if we maybe did this together. I mean, it would still, we'd be in the same retreat center. We wouldn't be talking to each other, but we'd go through the experience, kind of in a parallel fashion. So the next year, that was what I gave her actually for Christmas that year.
That's so romantic.
Yes. She was not excited about it. I can tell you.
Well, you're still married, so that's
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
You worked it out.
So the next year, 2006, we did that in the summer. Well, in both cases, we did it in July. And she also found it to be really awesome. And then I went for 10 years before I ever did that again. And that was a mistake. And partly that was because I switched churches and went through a lot of different changes in that switch. And so sadly, it wasn't until about 2016 that I took another one of those 8-day retreats. And that also was a game changer. That was kind of the precursor to me actually taking this other job. Wow. So then I felt like I'd kind of gotten to another crossroads here recently, and keep in mind, like when I was church planting, I was there for 14 years. When I was in Springfield, I was there for 10 years. So these aren't short time frames.
Right.
But I felt like there was something deeper that God really wanted to reveal to me and I needed to hear, but I wasn't sure exactly what that was. And I didn't know how else to do this, but to kind of go full bore. And this, about a year ago in September, I started in a class with my spiritual director, Father Bill, that was all about Ignatian spirituality. And I did that for about an 8-month time frame online. He still teaches those classes. He now lives and works out of Loyola University in Chicago. And so it was all online. And at the end of that, this past April, I thought, I feel some stirrings in my soul about things that I really would like to have God reveal to me, but I can't seem to get it. It's like on the tip of my tongue. I can't see it, and I just did this whole class on Ignatian spirituality. Maybe I should actually do the spiritual exercises of Ignatius instead of just reading about them and talking about them. So I got permission from my bishop to do that because this is a 30-day deal. So I took 2 weeks of vacation and 2 weeks of study leave that were available to me. And fortunately, there was a guy that the bishop in Missouri knew that I didn't know, who apparently had a place, kind of an apartment above his quote unquote garage. I mean, it really was like a French chalet. I mean, it was the way he built it. It was like incredible.
As you do. I mean, I was going to build one of those. I've been so busy.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could show you a picture. I mean, it's just phenomenal what this guy did. But in any case, there was an apartment that was above the kind of garage area in this barn or whatever he called it. And it was a place where he and his wife had lived while they were building the house that was, maybe 60 yards away. And then they moved into the house a couple of years after that, and it's just been sitting empty. And he told the bishop, look, if you ever got a pastor that wants a retreat, a quiet place, they could be away and alone, I got the spot for him. So I called the guy up, said, what do you think? And he says, well, yeah, I'd love for you to come. How long are you thinking about? I'm like, 30 days. And I thought either drop the phone or hang up, one of the two.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a good thing you weren't trying to push your luck or anything.
Yeah. And because we didn't know each other from Adam,
Right.
And so he says, well, when are you thinking? I said, well, I'm thinking July 29th through the 28th, June 29th through the 28th of July. And he said, okay, I think that'll work. I'm like, it will? So in any case, we worked that out, and that's where I stayed. And he just gave that spot to me for free for all 30 days. And I was kind of on my own for taking care of my meals and that kind of stuff. But it was a full apartment. It had a full kitchen and all that kind of stuff. So that was not a problem.
Did you have like a guided retreaty sort of stuff you were supposed to do while you were there? Or was it just being in silence the whole time?
Yeah. So a lot of people wonder about that. Like, what do you do for 30 days on a silent retreat? And of course, I really didn't know either. I'd never done it before. But this is a very specific kind of process. So I had a spiritual director that I worked with. It wasn't Father Bill. It was someone he recommended. He wasn't going to be available. So I met with her every day for 30 days, all 30 days.
Okay.
We met for 75 minutes to 90 minutes each day. And I also had assignments that were kind of loosely based on this book by Kevin O'Brien called The Ignatian Adventure. Oops, there we go. And my spiritual director would make assignments, and basically there were 5 one-hour prayer periods that I was to engage in on a daily basis. Now, what made that a little trickier than what it sounds is that those 5 one-hour prayer periods rarely ever went for 1 hour, because it takes a little while to get into this deeper level of prayer. And then you actually engage in the prayer, and then you need to reflect on the prayer, and then you need to actually journal about it afterwards. And so that could take anywhere from 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours per period. So you're really stretching out across the day when you do that, in addition to the 75 to 90 minute time with the spiritual director. So the days were fairly filled, frankly. And for me, I'm a journaler from way back. I've been doing this for many years. I journal every day. And that was an incredibly important part of the process, because there's no way that I could go back and tell you what happened to me or what happened in the midst of my prayer time in the 3rd prayer period on day 17. I have no clue. But I can go back to my journal and tell you with great accuracy what was going on. In fact, it turns out over the course of that 30 days, I wrote 398 pages.
Oh my gosh, you wrote a book.
I did. That was my journey.
Wow.
So it was so in between those times, so it's like an entire prayer experience. So, so when there are those specific prayer periods, but when you're not in one of those periods, then you need to kind of take a break where you can allow some of what just happened to sift into a deeper spot in you. And so you might go for a long walk, or, for me, I would, go for a run, or go hit golf balls. Sometimes I actually even played some golf, but the rule was if you play golf, you can't keep score, because then it takes you, for me, that I would get too competitive with myself on that. So I can't do that. I had a kayak with me. I would go out kayaking on a nearby lake, which was awesome. Love that. And those were the kind of the in-between times. And sometimes I just try to stack up the prayer periods so that I could have at least one section of the day that would be 2 to 3 hours that I could do something like that. Mm-hmm. And not surprisingly, sometimes some of the greatest things kind of fell into my mind and fell into my heart during that in-between time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That doesn't surprise me at all. Were you not in touch with your family at all during this time?
So I was in touch somewhat. I mean, I certainly didn't call every day. I didn't even call every week, but I did have some calls, some texts. I did set up my phone so that I wasn't answering phone calls from anybody else,
Right.
and also setting up my text so that if people sent me a text who obviously wouldn't know what I was doing, they get a text right back saying, "I'm on a retreat. I'll get back to you after 30 days."
Right. Well, so when you did this, I mean, because you had never, like you said, you hadn't done a full 30-day silent retreat before. What sort of expectations did you have going into it? I mean, did you have anything in mind where you were sort of thinking, okay, this is how I think it's going to play out?
Oh, absolutely. The first day, my spiritual director said, "Well, why are you here?"
Hmm.
And which is an appropriate question. And of course, I didn't know the woman that was serving as my spiritual director. I didn't know her at all. I mean, the first time we had a conversation, other than through email, was the first day of my retreat.
Oh, wow.
So we were really getting to know each other over the course of this time. And when you spend that much time with someone and talk about that many deep spiritual things over 30 days, you really get to know somebody, right?
Hmm.
The first day she says, "Well, why did you really want to do this?" And I said, "Well, I think I know." Because the spiritual exercises are designed. I mean, I knew enough about the spiritual exercises to know this, that they're designed for spiritual freedom, to get freedom from, so you can have freedom for. All right. So I said to her, "Well, I really want to get some freedom from some things in my life. Hurts, habits, hindrances. Ignatius would call them inordinate attachments."
Hmm.
So that I could have freedom for loving, praising, and serving God and doing God's will in my life. That was the whole point. And if you don't have the freedom from, you really can't do the freedom for.
Right.
So my larger goal in this the reason I was planning to submit myself to 30 days was that I really wanted to get to the freedom for.
Hmm.
I wanted to, what's God's new dream for me in this phase of my life, this coming phase of my life, and that wasn't clear to me at all, and that's really what I was looking for. So turns out God wasn't at all interested in that, and that was greatly frustrating to me. But before I talk about that, you need to know a little bit of the structure of the retreat. It's really designed to go into 4 weeks. They call them weeks. They're not really 7-day periods. They're stages of the spiritual movement. So the first stage is where you become aware of your own sin and the awesomeness of the grace of God that meets you in the midst of your own sin. That's week 1. Week 2 is the life and teachings of Jesus and walking through the life and teachings of Jesus with Jesus. Week 3 is the passion and death of Jesus. And week 4 is the resurrection of Jesus.
Hmm.
So those are the exercises and there are many meditations that are in this book that help you to go through those kinds of exercises. But in the midst of all this, of course, my goal was to get to the freedom for. That's what I was all about. Right?
Hmm.
Nothing. I'm at day. First of all, I'm at day 23. I'm talking to my spiritual director, and I'm still in week 2.
Yeah, John, well, this was one of my questions was, I mean, what are the challenges? Like, this seems like, did you find this remarkably difficult or frustrating? Because I'm imagining people listening to you talking, thinking, how on earth did he do that? Like, some people think, I can't even go an hour without talking to somebody. I can't imagine going 30 days, especially if you've got a set of expectations going in and you're on day 23 or whatever, and they're nowhere in sight. I mean, did you just decide I'm just leaving at some point?
Yeah. So I talked to my spiritual director and said, "Look, it's day 23, and I'm on week 2 still." And she says, That's because you're in week 2.
You're like, well, thank you for that clarity.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, just repeat
Exactly.
it.
I'm like,
Well, that clears things up. Thank
okay,
you.
well, that helps a lot, right? So she says, yeah, you're in week 2. That's exactly where you are in the midst of the exercises. You're in week 2, and she says, I'm not one that believes that a person should move on until they actually move spiritually into that next week. And so a day or two later, I think it was day 25, day 24 or 5, it was a day or two later. She said, well, as I was, because we would get together and I would kind of say, okay, this is what's happened over the course of the last 24 hours since we talked. And she said, oh, you've moved into week 3 now. I said, I have. Wow. Tell me more about that. What does that mean? So all this is happening, and I get to day 25, and I still got nothing. And I was just really ticked at that point. I mean, and now I'm on day 25. I've been on 3 8-day spiritual retreats like this previously. So I knew that if you put all those together, I had been there for 1 day longer than all those together, and I still had nothing. I'm like, what more do you want from me, God? I'm like, I can't. Like, do you want me to go on a 60-day retreat? I mean, what is the deal here?
Right.
And I was ready to pack it up and go home. I mean, I was within an inch of doing that on day 25. And of course I had these assignments. And so late afternoon, early evening, and somewhere around 6 o'clock, I did one of my assignments, and I just forced myself. I mean, I just, by sheer dint of will, got myself in a place that I could do that 1 hour prayer period. And that one probably was only 1 hour because I didn't want to be there. Didn't want to be doing it.
Right.
And God softened my heart just enough to stay the rest of that night. And then the next day, I had just enough grace to hang in there that day. Mm-hmm. And then on day 27, I had the greatest spiritual breakthrough of my life, short of what happened to me when I came to Christ at age 14.
Wow.
And I didn't see it coming. It was stunning. And then a whole bunch of things rolled out of that afterwards until I had the 3rd greatest spiritual breakthrough in my life on the morning of day 30.
Wow.
So, sometimes people say this, it really is true. God is never early and God is never late. God is always on time.
That is true, and that is really powerful. I mean, that's hard. It's just even hard to fathom. And I'm so glad that you managed to stick it out and that you got just what you needed to make it through another day, which sometimes I think describes life pretty well, actually, right? Is getting the food and the grace that we need to get through that day, because we don't know what anything else holds or where anything else is. So I did want to ask, because people, again, don't know you as well as I do, as you sort of alluded to before, this isn't, I mean, I don't think that you've really had this huge background in being a contemplative person. You're not a monk. You know what I'm saying? Like, you are a pretty type A, you're a church planter, and a church planter lives and dies by schedules and timelines and to-do lists and all of that stuff, or else things just don't get done. And because I'm imagining most people watching this going, wow, that's so amazing. I could never do that. Do you think that,
which is exactly what I said. I mean, so here's let me kind of give you some context on that. When I did my first 8-day prayer retreat in 2005, I was at a Catholic retreat center, and there were other people there along with my spiritual director. And he was actually leading some other Jesuit novices through their paces, the process they go through, which part of that was to do a 30-day spiritual retreat. And when he told me that, I looked at those guys and I looked at him and I thought, I didn't say this out loud. I thought this to myself, I will never do that. That
Yeah.
is absolute flipping insanity. I will never do that. I mean, I was struggling to be able to get through 8 days.
Right.
So that was 2005. This is 2021. It took me 16 years.
And I mean, do you really think though that you were able to sort of work your way up to that by doing some of the smaller things first and by through the spiritual direction? You know, because I'm kind of wondering what the best entry point is for somebody because I mean, some people might well be ready to take a deep dive, especially if you can. If I could go on a 30-day silent retreat, I would. I don't have that flexibility right now. But I mean, if I left for 30 days, I think my church members would be like, wasn't somebody supposed to preach here for a few weeks? They'd be a little confused. So it doesn't work with my schedule, but with my temperament, actually, I think it would work and I would be interested. But I think a lot of people might need to take some baby steps. Do you think that we're either meeting with a spiritual director or doing shorter retreats is a good entry point for that?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in most places, they won't, like if you were to go to a retreat center and say, I'd like to, sign up for a 30-day spiritual retreat, they'd say, well, tell us a little bit about your background. Like, have you done anything like this before? As they basically would tell you, no, probably not. Like if you just, kind of came in off the street and said, well, I've never done anything like this before. I have no experience. I've not been in spiritual direction. I've never spent more than 2 hours by myself. They would say, no, this is not a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was looking at, because I looked at other retreat centers besides this place in Western Missouri where I ended up going, and they basically kind of wanted my resume with regard to spiritual direction, and had I spent any significant time doing retreats, if this was going to be my first 30-day retreat, because what happens, I mean, this happens even for people that have some experience. They'll get on a retreat that's that long and they might not make it. They might, kind of cash out at about, day 13 or, whatever. And I just about cashed out on day 25, I mean, it was very, and at that point I'm thinking to myself, look, if I leave at day 25, who's going to blame me? I'm like 25 days. That's pretty darn good,
Right.
Make it to 30. No one's going to really care about that. But God cared about that.
Mm-hmm.
In ways.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, I mean, but what is it that you think ultimately that you were able to get out of a full 30-day retreat that you really can't or had not been able to do out of an 8-day or a shorter period? Because, I mean, you've always had, and I'm not questioning you or judging, I'm just sort of curious, like trying to tease this out a little bit more to flesh it out a little bit more, because you've always had a good relationship with God. Obviously, you've had strong faith for a very long time. You're a very spiritual person. And so, I mean, was it mostly the revelations that you feel like that you had? Was it that plus something more? Was it the extended time to sort of reset yourself? I'm curious what it is.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I want to go back and answer better the question you asked right before that, and I'll come to this one. Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
If you actually are interested in doing this and you've never done anything like this before, really, I would just suggest that you schedule 2 hours by yourself with everything off in your life, your computer, your phone, the TV, anything that has an off and on button on it. Just turn it all off and be alone with God and see if you can do that for 2 hours. And if you can, then schedule a morning or an afternoon, so it's 3 or 4 hours. And if you can do that, then schedule a whole day. And if you could do that, do an overnight someplace at a retreat center, or just go to a hotel or, wherever, and do it but again, you actually have to be by yourself and you can't have everything on, everything's got to be turned off. And once you've done that, then you begin to build your silence muscles. That's what I would call it. Because, scripture is really pretty clear about this. In Psalms, it says, God says, be still and know that I am God. And there's something about stillness that reveals the person and the character of God in ways that you cannot get in any other fashion. So I am a type A. I am like an activator type. I mean, I love getting stuff done, and kind of taking the next hill, whatever that may be. This is very counterintuitive for me, but it's actually something that speaks very deeply to my soul. So that's the way I would answer that. And I would actually really encourage someone to try spiritual direction. It's very easy. I mean, you can literally Google spiritual direction and you can find people that aren't that far from where you are and begin to get into that process. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone who is a part of the Roman Catholic tradition. There are lots of Protestant spiritual directors. The Jesuits have a very long, like centuries long history with this. And I ended up unknowingly tapping into that. I mean, when I first started connecting with Father Bill, I didn't know all that. I was just desperately looking for someone to help me to figure out how to stay in ministry and stay sane and stay connected to God all at the same time. And I got that and a whole lot more. So finding a spiritual director and then taking little excursions into silence and solitude, that's the way you start.
That's good.
So back to your other question, why would I do this? What was I really expecting to have happen? And why would I need to do it for 30 days? And why couldn't I just get that done in 3 days or 8 days? I didn't know for sure that I would need all 30 days. I had no idea. All I knew is that I thought probably I would need some freedom from some things in my life. Wasn't even sure. But I really wanted the freedom for. And I was willing to go to the mat with God on this. And as it turns out, God really wasn't interested in revealing much about my freedom for. I went for the whole 30 days and it was all about freedom from. That was what it's all the revelation, everything. It was about freedom from. And God revealed things to me and about my life and about how to get free from things that I've never been free from in my life. I'm going to be 62 years old in November. And I had never been free from a lot of these things in my entire life until now. In fact, there were some things that happened at the very end, at day 27 onto 30. There were things that I got free from that I didn't even know or believe I could get free from.
Wow.
They were outside of what some people called your intuitive circle, kind of that circle that's around you that you think, okay, well, the things that are inside are possible, but the things that are outside are impossible. Right. And that was an impossibility to me. And one of the things that was revealed to me in a way unlike anything I've ever experienced before is that God is actually the God of the impossible.
That's good. That's really good. Well, and to your point, it is interesting that sometimes we kind of give up on ourselves, I think. And it's easy to just say, there's certain things about myself that I just can't change, or my circumstances. And maybe I can't, but God certainly can.
And that's exactly it, Jennifer. That's exactly the point. Someone that's been at this as long as I have, if you climb the mountain 164,322 times, you don't feel very hopeful that you're going to make it to the summit on that next time. If you've gotten just short all those times, you kind of lose hope that you're going to be. And someone like me who is come on, we can go do it. Let's just try harder. That doesn't work. That didn't work for me.
Yeah. I know it really is hard because, like, you and I both are like these try harder people. Like if I can just make more. Sorry, we have a visitor on coffee with the pastor who's checking out my office. So, there's what?
Trash.
What?
Trash.
Oh yeah, I do have some. So we do. We have these thoughts, these type A people, we have this idea that we can do everything. And if we want to change things, we can just jump in there and do it. And if I just have one more to-do list, or if I just schedule more things or do that I can change it. And if I can't change it, it's not changeable. Right? I mean, that's my worldview, and that's how I look at things. Although, I may hope that things are different, and I do believe that God can do anything. Sometimes when it comes to me, I think maybe I'm a bigger project than everything else, right? Which is not accurate, but that's sometimes what I think, that sure, God can do everything, but I'm kind of a handful. So I don't know if that's going to happen or not. And I can see how that could be really revelatory to think, no, God really can do anything and really can change.
Yeah. Oh, it's the most personal experience I've ever had of God doing the impossible in my life. And it was, this was a journey with Jesus, as I described the 4 weeks. It's all about the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, really. I really sensed that towards the end of my retreat, Jesus actually spoke to me from within my heart. I know that sounds kind of mystical and spooky and weird and the like, but nevertheless, there were some things spoken to me on the inside that brought about the change that I couldn't hear. They wouldn't have had any level of impact on me if they would have come from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Someone from outside would have said that to me. If I would have read it from the outside coming in, it had to come from the inside out.
That does make a lot of sense. Yeah, it really does. And for me anyway, like I've been doing a lot of meditation lately, like 10-minute meditations, 20-minute meditations. And I feel like it really tamps down the noise in my life so that I can really get more clarity and focus on things that I can't focus on or get clarity on otherwise. And I could see how it could tap into that as well, that it could sort of lower the level of noise so that you're better able to focus on.
Yeah. So that's the other thing. Like when you are in long periods of silence like that, what happens is all the stuff that you have stuffed down for whatever length of time, it starts coming up, and so I often use the metaphor of beach balls. When you're, say you're out in the ocean and you're trying to push beach balls down under the water. Well, you can do that for a while. Usually it's a short amount of time. And then all of a sudden, one comes up and the other one comes up because they're not meant to be pushed under the water. And that's what happens when you have time, that kind of long alone time with God. Stuff starts coming up. I mean, stuff that you forgot you ever stuffed down there. And you thought, well, maybe that's all gone and done. I mean, that was years ago. And sometimes it's not all gone and done, and it needs to be dealt with in an appropriate way, a fresh way, a different way. And that's one of the reasons why people often don't want to do this.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I could definitely see it bringing up a lot of things that you're just not ready to address. Right. And I could certainly see being there on day 25 or whatever and seeing things coming up saying, you know what? No, thank you. Not sure that I'm interested in that right now.
Right.
And haven't been for the past 15 years or whatever it is, right?
Well, I told you about how long it took for me to go on these retreats. It had to be, someone had to introduce the idea and talk about it over and over and over again. For the same reason. It's like, well, why would I want to do that?
Right. I'm not sure I want to know that much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can see that. I mean, because it is very revealing, but I can see how that might be a little overwhelming or a little scary,
Yeah. So that's when people have asked, just give me the shorthand. What was it like? And I said, well, it was very humbling. It was revealing. and it was life altering. So if you're up for that.
Right. Yeah. Although sometimes I think the idea of altering your life sounds a lot better and different than what it actually ends up looking like.
Well, it's true because it's life altering in a Godward direction, maybe not necessarily the one that you would have expected or chosen.
Right.
But then that becomes an issue of trust, right? Well, who really does know what would be best for my life, me or God?
Yep. That whole surrender, saying, am I going to run my life or am I going to let God lead the way? It's hard.
It is hard. The very last day, my 30th day, I said I told you I had this huge revelation. That was early in the morning, actually, before I met with my spiritual director at 9:00.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would explain this to her, and she was just agog with all the. I mean, it's like there had just been this flood of revelations, especially towards the end, and she says, "Well, Roger, this is really the way the spiritual exercises are designed to work." I said, "Well, what do you mean?"
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Well, when you go in the exercises, before you come, you're to essentially leave everything behind. And when you're on the exercises for those 30 days, you do your level best to engage with God as fully as you possibly can. And when you leave another person."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm here to tell you there's a lot of truth to that.
Wow. That is really powerful. Well, I am really happy for you that you were brave enough to engage on that journey, because it really is. I mean, it really is brave, and you really committed to it. I mean, getting approval from your bishop and doing all of that. So that really is a big commitment. Plus, your family probably would have been wondering what's going on if it happened.
So you have to, like in my case, our kids are grown, but my wife, of course, she was the first one I asked about this, and she's, "Oh yeah, I think that's fine, honey. Go ahead." I'm like, "Oh no. You don't understand. If I go on a 30-day retreat, that means you are going on a 30-day retreat apart from me." And she thought that was okay. I mean, she wasn't crazy about it, but she thought that was okay. Well, when I came back home, she said, "Don't ever do that again."
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're still married.
Yeah.
I'm glad that she's a little more understanding. Yeah, I can imagine having somebody leave for 30 days. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you shared this with us. We're about out of time, but is there anything else that you wanted to add that you haven't gotten a chance to mention yet in our discussion? Because I don't want to cut things too short.
I really don't think so. We've covered the waterfront.
Yeah, I think that we were pretty thorough. So, okay. So on Coffee with the Pastor, I have been doing a lightning round of 3 questions at the end. I ask everybody the same 3 questions. These are super easy. It's not a quiz. These are all just personal questions that you can answer however you like. And I'm just having fun seeing how everybody's answers are different. So are you ready for the lightning round?
I'm ready. Bring it on.
I figured you were born ready. All right. So what book are you reading right now that's interesting you? Or if you're not reading anything now, or if what you're reading is boring, what's your favorite book that you want to share with people?
Or if your book is boring, I love that. So, I just last night finished reading a book that I started fairly recently called The Bondage Breaker by Neil Anderson. And I had heard about this book some time ago. It's been out for a while, but it recently was revised. And it's dynamic. I mean, it's really about overcoming negative thoughts, irrational feelings, habitual sins, that kind of stuff. And really focuses a lot on how to kind of take a spiritual approach to that rather than a medical or psychological approach. Not that those aren't good things; they are, but sometimes the issue is more spiritual at its root. And so I just have found that to be really a powerful book.
That's awesome. All right. Well, question 2 probably dovetails with a lot of what we've been talking about today. But what is keeping you grounded and sane during COVID?
Yeah, I mean, you can't be on 30-day retreats all the time. But what I have been able to do is incorporate silence and solitude into my daily routine and journaling. And then I've been pretty faithful to having a Sabbath day each week, which is not a day off, but rather a day that I can really be connected to God and do things that are restorative in my life. Kind of stop, rest, contemplate, and delight.
That's great. So the third question is, what are you most looking forward to this fall?
Well, my daughter's coming to visit from Tucson, Arizona next week, so I'm really looking forward to that.
Good. That'll be fun.
Yeah, and my family always gets together for Thanksgiving at my mom's house, and we were unable to do that last year, of course. Yeah. So that will be super important this year.
Awesome. Well, that sounds great. Well, listen, Roger Ross, you've been amazing. I am so glad that you got to join me today and our guest who wandered in and left. So you just never know what's going to happen. I'm telling you, ministry is messy. You never know how it's going to turn out, but this has been great. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. Be on the lookout for calls and emails from random Texans saying, what is it about this retreat business? So you can fill them in if they have questions. All right.
Yeah, that's fine. It's absolutely a delight to be with you, Jennifer. It always is. You're a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you. Have a great week.
Okay, you too.